All right, as people are filtering in, I'll just start us off. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Erin Driscoll. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Wilmington Memorial Library. I also want to make sure to thank our neighboring library, Tewksbury Public Library, for joining us to help promote this program. I'm so excited to welcome Judy Norsegan and Laura Prieto tonight. Judy is a co-founder of Our Bodies Ourselves. She served as executive director of the organization from 2001 to 2015 and as chair of the board of directors from 2018 to 2023. She is an internationally renowned speaker and author on a range of women's health concerns, and she's been an author and editor for 9 editions of Our Bodies Ourselves. Laura is the program director for Our Bodies Ourselves Today and a scholar in residence at the Center for Women's Health and Human Rights at Suffolk University. She has a PhD in history and long experience as a researcher, writer, feminist scholar, and public humanist. Her first book was At Home in the Studio, The Professionalization of American Women Artists. And she's currently working on projects that include visual sources in women's suffrage history, locally in Boston, as well as across the country. And I'm so excited to welcome them here tonight to share with us the history of Our Bodies Ourselves, a book that many women, girls, and people of all genders have turned to for frank information on health and sexuality, and also to speak to the work that continues. So with that, I will turn it over to Judy to get us started.
Thanks so much, Erin, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you at the Wilmington Public Library, and I'm especially pleased to be doing this with Laura Prieto, who is the program director at Our Bodies Ourselves Today. Our growing collaboration with Suffolk University has been so rich and so engaging. We're really thrilled about that as well. Obviously, in an hour, we can't do that much in terms of history, but I'm going to touch upon some of the highlights of our, past 5+ decades, and we will bring it into the present, some of the advocacy issues we've worked on. But obviously, you'll have to go to the website to learn more about many of the things I touch upon and things you might be interested in. Of course, I have to begin with a picture, and it's not coming up. That's very weird. My scroll down button's not working. Let me try getting out again. My screen is frozen, Erin.
All right, let me,
Yeah.
I will share my screen. One moment.
Not sure how that happened, but none of my arrows will work. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.
Here we go then. Well, there we go. This is a picture of the very first newsprint edition of Our Bodies Ourselves. It came out in December of 1970, titled Women and Their Bodies. And very quickly, with the first printing in 1971, we titled it Our Bodies Ourselves to reflect much more about how we're trying to own the information, everything about our bodies that felt so othered in the past. There are 9 editions total, and you're going to have to go next. I'm going to fast forward to the 9th edition, which came out in 2011, was produced in the book's 40th anniversary year with a focus on reproductive and sexual health across the lifespan. It's been fascinating to look at the topics that we've incorporated over the years. They weren't all there in the beginning. Next slide. These are 2 single topics we did, one just on menopause. At that point, we didn't understand that we should use the term perimenopause. Menopause is a certain point in there, but this book dealt with really the perimenopause. And then in 2008, we came out with a single topic book on pregnancy and birth. Next edition. These were all collaborations with many people across the country and even the globe. Now, I'm just going to touch upon a number of the foreign language adaptations, translations, just so you get a sense of the creativity, the cover designs that women came up with. This is the second Japanese edition from 1988. Next slide. This is the Thai edition from 1996. The next slide. The Chinese edition came out in 1998, and it was at the Beijing conference and shared. Next. Serbian edition came out in 2001, and that picture on the cover is from one of their very first ever Take Back the Night marches in Belgrade. Violence against women was a huge theme in this book because the women were coping with the aftermath of the war and what it meant to have partners and husbands come home traumatized by what they had done and what they had experienced. Next. Romanian edition, 2002. Next. This is the Senegal edition. It's for French-speaking Africa. They did 2 different editions. We really love this colorful cover. In each case, it was a feminist organization that led the collaboration that produced the translation adaptation. Next. The Korean edition in 2005. Next. The Tibetan edition, Healthy Body, Healthy Mind, and the Tibetan Nuns Project was created in part because of a midwife who came from the Netherlands and connected with the midwives there. You can show the next slide. They had a group of older midwives, and there's a younger midwife on the right. The book was in 2 different volumes, and it included a preface from the Dalai Lama himself. Next. This is a Russian edition that was produced online in 2007 because paper was so expensive. Previously, there had been another Russian print edition, but this became available and I think is still available online, produced by Women's Health in St. Petersburg. Next. This is the Bangla edition produced in 2010. Sunlap and Manavi, 2 groups that included some men in the collaboration, and that was maybe a first where men were part of the core team. Next. This is the second Armenian edition that came out almost 15 years ago. The first one was some years before that, and I've been to Armenia about 9 or 10 times, and I have actually deeply appreciated the way they've used the book. And the next slide will show you an example of one of the trainings where women in Yerevan were learning about manual vacuum abortion, suction abortion on a pelvic model, but they were also training to go out into the villages where healthcare was quite limited. Next. In Nigeria, the coordinating group was called Women for Empowerment, Development, and Gender Reform, and they adapted sections of the book into Pidgin English and Yoruba, and they used alternative formats like posters that would be put on canoes that were going downstream. Very creative. Next. This is Women and Their Bodies, produced in East Jerusalem. There was a collaboration of Palestinian and Jewish Israeli women. It's a project that, alas, could not probably be put into place at the moment, but they produced Arabic and Hebrew side-by-side editions, and they also produced some of this in English. Their project is written about. This link will give you a blog that was fascinating, and you will be able to access these slides later and go and read more about this collaboration. Next. In Turkey, there was a coordinating group, Mavi Kalam, that tried to complete a book, but they never did succeed. In part, it is because of the incredibly hostile climate towards feminism in that country. And the group still exists, but if you go to their website, you will see that the focus is quite different. But they did have some wonderful projects that were focused on the empowerment of women and girls. Next. In Nepal, the coordinating group, Women's Rehabilitation Center, is adapted almost into 7 booklets in Nepali. And I think that the 7th did get completed, but I have to be honest in saying that I'm forgetting at the moment. The coordinator of this project is a physician who was very active politically, and she will actually be coming to Boston to work at the Boston University School of Public Health as a visiting scholar soon, because her wealth of experience, particularly with the human rights defenders in Nepal and working on violence against women, is of use to anybody working on these issues across the globe. Next. The Spanish language, Our Bodies, Ourselves, was first produced in 1976 and 7. It was a newsprint paper with a paperback cover, but subsequently a collaboration of 23 groups in Latin America, led by a group of Latinas who worked worked in Boston, produced this edition, Nuestros Cuerpos, Nuestras Vidas, in 2000. And it's a possibility that a new revised adaptation will come to fruition in the coming years. Next. This is a more recent book. It's the French adaptation produced in Quebec in 2019. The focus is on relationships and sexuality. It's a refreshing project created by a large group of women, including younger and older women. Next. This is the new French edition. One of the very first European editions to be produced back in the 70s was Notre Corps Nous-Mêmes in Paris, France. And this adaptation is produced by a feminist. It's published by a feminist publishing house, or Détente. And they had another group of younger women working with a few of the original translators of the book. They kibbutz, they collaborated, they went to some of the meetings, so they made this an intergenerational project as well. But we're very excited to see the new French edition come out in France. Next. This is the most recent project, the Portuguese edition produced in Brazil. It's called Nossos Corpos por Nós Mesmas. I do not speak Portuguese, but I'm trying to pronounce it correctly. It's a collaboration of the Coletivo Feminista Sexualidade e Saúde in São Paulo, and colleagues and students and faculty, especially at two of the largest universities in Brazil. Now, I can tell already that one of the slides got omitted because the next slide is probably not the Ugandan edition of the book, but we do want to mention that the current board chair at Our Bodies, Ourselves, Diana Namambeja Aboye, actually led the production of the Ugandan edition of the book. And I will add that to the slideshow before it gets posted at the library website, so you all can see what a great project that represents. And there are ongoing trainings in villages in Uganda, which we have been supporting, and Diana has been leading. So this work is continuing on. Just mentioning a few of the selected global challenges that we and many of our global partners have addressed over the years: the increasing sexualization of women and young girls and the role of the media in all of this, more intensive and sweeping attacks on reproductive rights and justice than we have seen in many years, especially in the United States, of course, and violence against women and girls, including sex trafficking. These are just three of many global challenges that we and our partners have been trying to address. Next. I'm just going to leave this as a reference for you. If you want to get really good background materials on the reproductive justice issues that we're not going to be able to talk about today, this briefing book is quite excellent. Next. We have been working with colleagues and other organizations to address assisted reproductive technologies and the intersection of egg donation and surrogacy. In particular, the increasing demand for women's eggs for IVF purposes, and also the increasing demand for women as gestational mothers, so-called surrogates, and the growth of transnational commercial surrogacy. Next. We started a project called Surrogacy 360. It is now led by and run by our very close colleagues at the Center for Genetics and Society in Oakland, California. Berkeley, I think. And this project is meant for intended parents, for everyone involved in assisted reproduction and who might want to learn more about what's at stake, what are the human rights issues. It's an excellent website, and we refer people to it all the time. Next. This is just one of the issues that have been raised. This is regarding ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, when you have hyperstimulation of the ovaries to produce multiple eggs, whether it's for IVF for yourself or someone else. This is one of the most serious consequences of hyperstimulation of the ovaries. You can read this later, but it is a potentially a life-threatening condition, which is why we mention it here. And there are warning signs, and a number of younger women who have sought to provide eggs for fertility purposes for others, not for themselves, have had very, very serious bouts with OHSS, and hospitalization was important quite instantly. Next. Serious side effects are reported by women who have used leuprolide acetate, commonly known as Lupron, and it's a drug that is often used to suppress the ovaries before you have the hyperstimulation. And these are just some of the possible problems with Lupron. And one of the things we've learned from women who have dealt with Lupron effects, and not just in this context, but say for the treatment of endometriosis and a few other FDA-approved treatments, they have had these as long-standing problems. There are many women who, for example, had memory loss that continued months, if not years, after taking Lupron. So it's a drug to be taken quite seriously. Next. This is just one of many ads that will appear in college campuses across the country that emphasize how much money you can make by becoming an egg provider. Very little is said about the risks and potential problems, and we've learned from women who've done this that they often don't get good informed consent when they go to offer their eggs. Next. In response, at one point, we worked with some law students at UC Irvine to develop a simple ad that would be a counter ad in some of these newspapers in college settings. It just simply said, did you know, have you asked, and have you been told? And then we suggest that for balanced information about egg donation or provision, that you go to these other sources for information. Next. Another issue that we spent quite a bit of time on is the question of risks surrounding breast implants, whether they're used for reconstruction after mastectomy or purely for augmentation. And most breast implants go in for augmentation purposes. We partnered with a marvelous filmmaker, Carol Shankuti, who produced this film, Absolutely Safe, which I'm sorry to say is as relevant today as it was years ago when she completed it. We also have a 23-minute documentary that she produced with a plastic surgeon in New York City who asked, I think, about 8 of her patients to participate and tell their stories. This plastic surgeon hardly ever does implants, but she has been very, very much involved in explanting and removing breast implants that have been producing problems. So we encourage people to tell those they know who are considering breast implants to look at alternatives. Even if there's been a mastectomy, there are other possibilities for reconstruction and other ways to think about life afterwards. And we encourage people to think about those options before making a final decision. Next. We always stick this slide in because we are in the world of public health. And we believe that this very important public health principle, that the absence of evidence of harm is not the same as proof of safety, ought to be taken to heart, and that we should combine this message with the precautionary principle of public health in an age of escalating commercialism in all sectors of our lives. We don't believe we have to have full proof of some of the dangers that we face, whether it's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, before we do something about preventing very serious downstream consequences. So we do advocate that we do something before we have absolute proof. Next. This is just an example of one of our great campaigns over the years. Back in, I think, 2011 or 12, we were very concerned that young women didn't know what was at stake, and young women weren't even registering to vote. So we started a bumper sticker campaign. Next, it's called Our Bodies, Our Votes. And, you know, we had these stick it, click it, share it. Next, some people put it on their, post their mailboxes. Next, this is a group of women in, I think, Texas who had distributed bumper stickers, and they were working locally. Next, this is a student in a dorm, put it all over her computer. And for a while, we did see a fair number of Our Bodies, Our Votes stickers around here in Boston. Next. Then a year or two later, after Todd Akin made that very infamous comment, and he was a member of Congress, I believe, from Illinois, and suggested that women couldn't get pregnant when they were raped because a woman's body shuts down. Some magnificent mechanism he knew about, but the rest of us didn't. And we realized with that we had to educate members of Congress. So we had some support from donors, and we got a copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves into every single senatorial and congressional office. Next, we did some of these deliveries by hand, and I did it with Christy Turlington Burns, who's a famous model. She's there with the executive director of Every Mother Counts. That's her organization she still works with. And the two women in the middle there are young interns from the National Women's Health Network who helped me lug these books all over the congressional offices, the Senate building. And on the right is the congressional representative, I believe, from Minnesota. I'm forgetting her name. But we had a wonderful time meeting these members of Congress and listening to what they wanted to do to preserve access to information and to reproductive health services in particular. Next. We've always been advocates for single-payer health care, Medicare for all, and there's a wonderful Globe op-ed that I wrote with Dr. Jennifer Potter, who still practices in the Boston area. It's called A Singular Solution for Healthcare, and we recommend it for anyone who'd like to go back now 15 years and see what we were trying to do. And that was even 20 years after we were working with Senator Ron Dellums, who was a member of Congress, now not alive, but had been advocating for a national health service similar to the one that was thriving, not doing so well now, in England. Next. I'm going to close with just a word about the importance of men being engaged in violence prevention. There is this global organization called Men Engage, and they're non-governmental. They ally with one another, and they produce wonderful materials to support men who want to be good allies for everyone trying to stop gender-based violence. Next. One of the best publications is called Voicemail Magazine, which recently passed over from being produced in Massachusetts, no less, to Canada. And the Next Gen Men group in Ottawa is taking over publication and distribution of Voicemail. They will have all their issues posted as PDF files so you can read back issues and see what they do going forward. We're very excited to see this passing of the torch. Rob Oken, who was for many years the able editor of Voicemail, is now moving more into a retirement. Next. I always like to mention Sex and World Peace. It's by a group of economists, and it's a very well-researched book that Gloria Steinem once brought to my attention. This book shows how the extent of violence committed against females is the major determinant of whether or not a country is violent within itself or more willing to use military violence against those in other countries. It is an indicator more important than poverty, natural resources, or the degree of democracy. That's a stark fact, but they did really excellent research. And the final slide is simply to say that if you want to have fun learning about some of this history, not just the women's health movement, but also the women's movement circa 1968-9 to 70-71, this wonderful documentary, She's Beautiful When She's Angry, is available online through a number of streaming platforms. And I recommend you do that some evening when you want to learn more about women's history in this country in particular, and have a good time doing it. It's full of great humor. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it over to Laura.
Wonderful. If you wouldn't mind if I just break in for one moment, I forgot to tell people at the top that if you have any questions, please do place them in the Q&A. We will certainly address questions at the end. Judy and Laura, if you wouldn't mind, before we move on to Laura's work and Our Bodies Ourselves today, with it being Women's History Month, Judy, would you mind just telling us a bit? I was surprised to learn when I was, looking into the history of women and their bodies, and later Our Bodies Ourselves, that first edition that you show on that first slide sold 250,000 copies in New England by word of mouth alone, which is just an amazing number. You didn't have any marketing that I know of, and
Well, it's not totally true. The New England Free Press was well connected to movement groups across the country, working on civil rights, the peace movement. Women's movement and feminism wasn't that much of interest. In fact, part of this story is that the men who ran the New England Free Press didn't think that Our Bodies Ourselves was as political enough a publication to include. They were wrong, and there were certainly women working there who argued. And the women at Our Bodies Ourselves, it was the Boston Women's Health Book Collective at that point, had to put up the initial, I think, $700 or $800 to do the first printing. It was, as you just described, an amazing phenomenon that people discovered it, shared it, bought more copies, and that's why the commercial publishers got interested. And the first Simon & Schuster edition came out in 1973. It was hard for us actually to move to a large publishing house when we knew the importance of being in a movement for change, in a larger movement for change. But we also wanted the information to get out there, and there was no way the New England Free Press could ever have the reach, the ability to distribute the way Simon & Schuster could.
excellent.
And you also, Judy, if I could prompt you, also negotiated with Simon & Schuster to agree to publish the Spanish version of Nuestros Cuerpos, Nuestras Vidas. That was part of that.
We didn't, they didn't agree to publish it. They agreed to give us $3,000. That was part of our contract. What I did leave out, which was as important as this, and we did use that money, and we actually ended up self-publishing the first edition. And we went to a place in New Hampshire called New Victoria Press, a printing press with newsprint publications run by women, and they did a fabulous job. But what we did also negotiate in the agreement with Simon & Schuster was this very important clinic copy discount, whereby any nonprofit organization, a clinic, an organization that did health counseling could buy the book at a 70% discount. And the only condition was that you could not resell it. You could give it away or you could ask for donations, but you couldn't resell it. And many clinics across the country, many Planned Parenthoods bought the book that way. And that is another vehicle for getting the book out there, where women who couldn't afford to buy it, it was $2.95 when it came out in 1973. And that was a lot of money then, just like $30 is a lot of money now for a lot of people.
Well, I also hadn't realized before looking into it just this year that, this all really did start in Boston. If I'm not mistaken, it was somewhat born out of a female liberation conference at Emmanuel College. Can you give us a little sense of kind of what the impetus was for the book? Like, what was the landscape like out there if you were to go to the doctors in 1969 seeking medical information about your body?
Well, the conference in 1969 that was held at Emmanuel College it was a women's liberation conference. And one of the workshops was led by Nancy Hawley and another person who is not alive now, but Nancy Miriam Hawley. And it was the first time some of these subjects were discussed in a setting with other people more openly. It was an electrifying workshop because the women decided to continue meeting. This is all written up at the website, which is one of the reasons that I left it out, is that this history, in fact, has been written up in numerous places. Women realized that we didn't know enough about our bodies. Women decided they were going to get together and educate themselves. We realized that doctors weren't going to be very cooperative here. Most of them were, patting you in the head. Don't worry about it. It's my job. When we started looking at the textbooks, we discovered just how horrible the training was, that, doctors should be, seen as in the image of God, and, language that you would laugh at right now. But if you were in training as a physician, no wonder you came up with ideas like that. They were in your textbooks. And we were also committed to learning from textbooks that we could understand. Most of us, we were college educated, so we went to the Countway Medical Library. They did let us in, and we could get access to those journals and those books, and that was an important source of information for us. And there were some physicians and some nurses who were very eager to support us and help us and talk through some of these things. I mean, it led to a realization that much of what is done in the name of women's health, or what was done then, was done without a good basis in terms of evidence. So we had lots of cesareans happening, lots of hysterectomies, lots of use of psychoactive drugs with not a very good basis. In fact, some cases, no basis for their efficacy or safety. And it was that awareness that really got us to look at everything. Oh my God, if it's here, here, and here, it's probably there, there, and there. And so we were part of that movement that got the Office of Research on Women's Health established, and NIH, that has been calling for research that's specific to women and specific to gender and all the things that we've not answered in the past with earlier research. And, even today, you saw the announcement that President Biden made just a few weeks ago. We still have a ways to go.
Thank you so much. And now, Laura, we'll turn it over to you to talk to the work that continues today with Our Bodies, Ourselves Today. Would you like me to advance your slides?
Sure, that might be the easiest thing. Every minute counts at this point. Thank you, Erin. And yes, thank you to Erin and the Wilmington Public Library for inviting us to speak today. It's a real honor to be following Judy on this program. I'm here to talk about what I like to refer to as the latest edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves. Since its publication, 54 years ago, 1970, it has taken many turns, and we saw some examples of that in Judy's slides. Many formats, many languages, even Yoruba posters. So this is, in a way, just the latest iteration. And there's still a great need for this information and for the perspective of our bodies, ourselves, but the context has changed, and so has the media. If I could have the next slide, Erin. So I'm just going to say a few things. We want to preserve some time for discussion, and please keep putting some questions in the Q&A for us. So I'll go quickly through my slides, but that vast lack of information in 1969, 1970 that Judy mentioned, that has changed in some ways. And one of those ways is it's become a real vast arena of misinformation that we have at our disposal now. So there's a lot of more open discussion than ever of sex and sexuality and bodies and abortion and menstruation, gender identity, birth control, but evidence-based information is still in a short supply. And that's one of the continuing needs for Our Bodies, Ourselves. I put up here some results of a poll run by an independent nonprofit, KFF, that found that half to 3/4 of the public aren't really sure which of these 10 false claims they were asked about were true or not. The poll really showed how many adults are skeptical of false claims that they might hear in the news or from neighbors, but they're also really uncertain when it comes to the truth of public health topics, which do call for some expertise. And the next slide, along with that misinformation, I just want to note that there still are a lot of gaps in information, and a gender gap, to be specific, at every level. I mean, it starts with funding for research, where there's a major lack of funding to study female bodies, both for clinical research and other basic research. That's why President Biden's initiative, for example, is so important. For a long time, historically and continuing, research data has tended to be collected from males and then generalized to females. It's what Dr. Bernadette Healy 20 years ago nicknamed the Yentl syndrome. And on top of that, there's a gender gap in data collection, a gender gap in gender reporting, a gender gap in data analysis. And I don't even mean feminist analysis. I mean any kind of analysis that takes gender into account in the health data that does get collected. Next slide, please. So there's a really high cost to this, to these gender gaps. When women develop health conditions, too often they're told their symptoms are normal when they should really be told they're common. For every one woman diagnosed with a women's health condition, 4 more or less go undiagnosed, completely undiagnosed. And this gender gap even affects knowledge of really basic anatomical details. There was a study in 2017 that found almost half of women don't know what the cervix is. And meanwhile, Our Bodies Ourselves Today, which I'm going to turn to, has a whole cervix gallery available for you to explore. So you will not only learn what the cervix is, but what lots of real cervixes actually look like. I'm not going to show you those in this slideshow. Next slide, please. So just talking about what we're doing about it, the misinformation engulfing us, and also the gender gaps that persist at Our Bodies Ourselves Today, which is at Suffolk University. We're continuing the Our Bodies Ourselves mission and ethos. We're doing it in digital format. So we're still creating some content, and we're also curating other content. Our team, and you see some of their beautiful faces here, they include review panels of highly qualified experts. They have diverse backgrounds and perspectives from many different fields: medical, legal, academic. They include researchers and clinicians, activists, educators, patients, survivors. It's a big community of volunteers. I call them the roughly 100 feisty feminists that I work with every day. And they make our work possible and ensure that our content is accurate and trustworthy. So they review everything that we are considering putting on the platform. Well, I think this really fulfills the collaboration that has always been a real strong point for Our Bodies Ourselves, coming together to share knowledge and self-knowledge. Next slide, please. So as you'd expect from Our Bodies Ourselves, our content is not just reliable and evidence-based, but we frame it. We provide the analysis, as we have since 1970, articulating an intersectional feminist perspective. We talk about how health isn't just an individual experience, how it's shaped by society and economics and political factors, right? The social determinants of health, as sociologists call it. And we explain our framing and focus on the site as well, talking about how central reproductive justice is as a lens, gender expansiveness, and why we say our site is for women, girls, and gender expansive people. So there are lots of cornerstones that I put on this slide as well for us, that we are bringing to this content that we're curating for you. I also just want to add that our funding comes from Suffolk University, from grants, from individual donors. It does not come from corporations, pharmaceutical companies, or medical insurance companies, because we want to make sure that we are independent of that kind of corporate influence and those conflicts of interest. We are operating this site on the behalf of the public. If I could have the next slide, please. So just like really quickly, these are some of the kinds of main sections on the website. The address is coming up, although it's not hard to, it's not hard to find, at least I really hope it's not hard to find. That we include this kind of health and sexuality information, as we call it, but we also include people's personal stories and conversations. Some of those are videos, some are audio, some are written text. But again, reflecting from our bodies ourselves, that very powerful combination of research-based info and also sharing with each other and checking in with each other of what we know about ourselves and what we have learned about our own health over time. There are various different subject areas we focus on. That's in the blue box. I won't read through them all in the interest of time. And we are expanding those all the time. So we have plans to start a whole new subject area on chronic illness, for example, on eating well, and lots of other areas that we would like to expand into. If I could have the next slide, please. These are just a few very quick examples of the kinds of content we have on our site. We have some kinds of content that we have written and developed ourselves, like this particular on the left, which is a whole page talking about abortion aftercare and complications to watch out for. That's something we developed and wrote ourselves. There are other great resources from around the internet that we curate and list, like the middle example, which is from the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. And also, as I said, these stories and conversations, this is a video about advice to anyone who menstruates by someone that we interviewed for the website. So you'll find really diverse kind of media and also genres of things on the website. Next slide, please. And just to conclude and turn it over so we can have some more discussion with our webinar audience, here are some ways that you can get engaged with Our Bodies, Ourselves and its legacy in Our Bodies, Ourselves today. The website address is up here. We'd also love for you to tell other people about us. You'll find us on social media. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. That's a place you can learn about our events. We would love to speak at your community organization, meeting, or public event. So please reach out to us, and there's an email there if you would like to open up any conversation there. And also, we want to strengthen that connection to advocacy and activism. So you will find some additional organizations to support on our Get Involved pages. And we hope you will do many of the things on this list following up today. That's it for me. I think we'd love to have some discussion and conversation, answer some questions now.
And
Yes,
actually, Erin, before you go to the questions, I want to note one event that will be posted at the website at Suffolk, and we'll be promoting it, is a screening of this wonderful film called Fight Like Hell about the life of Mother Jones. It's a one-woman performance by Kailani Lee. She did one about Rachel Carson that maybe others have seen. It's called A Sense of Wonder. And she's a marvelous performer. It's so good that she had to make a film of herself performing. And that will also involve a talk back with Kailani Lee at one of the theaters at Suffolk University. We're also co-sponsoring a screening of Plan C, which is a medication abortion, and it's going to be at the Coolidge Theater, co-sponsored with the Boston University School of Public Health. And we will have Francine Coito, who is featured in the film. The documentary is about, I think, 80 minutes long, that evening on April 17th. And information like this you can get at our website. And if you sign up to get those various social media, you will be informed. So I just want to mention that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have some questions from the chat, and please, anyone watching, if you have any questions or comments, I'm sure many of you have had an edition of Our Bodies Ourselves bought for you or that you purchased, let us know. First comment or first question is this viewer says they understand this program had to start with feminist organizations, but do you think that we need to have more male inclusive attitude today? We see that when an issue is a women's issue, we get little attention or funding, but when an issue impacts men, it gets resolved. And one example they give is abortion access, and that is a issue that impacts men as well, but that the face of the issue is usually women.
You want to start, Laura?
Really, Judy? I have two thoughts in response to that question. One is that it can be very smart strategically to show men also how all of these same issues that affect women and gender expansive people, they affect men, cis men as well. We're all on the planet together. Most of us know people of different genders. It's all relevant and it might even affect them personally. So it can be really powerful strategically. But I also think it's worth fighting for the principle that we should also care about women's issues as women's issues and because they affect women. That's a little tougher case to make sometimes, but I think it is also worth simultaneously also worth insisting. And that is a legacy of those feminist organizations that we have been talking about.
I agree with Laura. And one of the reasons I included those several slides about Men Engage is that I believe that the gender-based violence problem, in particular, preventing violence against women, it's a problem that will never be completely solved or even addressed remotely adequately without greater participation of men. And there are many men who are ready to be involved. Obviously, it's hard to raise these issues sometimes with men because when you talk about male violence against women and you open the subject, what are you as a man going to think? Well, you're labeling me as part of the problem. This is an awkward conversation. But men can be part of the solution, even as they might be part of the problem too. And that is something that we have to wrap ourselves around. And the engagement of men in creative approaches, bystander education. There are a whole series of projects that have been created by men and women, usually together, but focus in on what men can do. And I think that applies to a lot of areas. Abortion is a good example too. So we are not going to win a lot of these political struggles without a great many men at our side, and also men who see these not just as women's issues, not just as narrow niche concerns. First of all, as we heard from a man at one of the flash mob dances at South Station recently, they have daughters and they care about their daughters' futures. And so all of these issues matter to them, even if it's not something that affects their own body, it'll affect the body of someone they love.
Excellent. I saw a comment in the Q&A that people were having trouble with the chat feature. It should be up and running now. I apologize for that. But if anyone has been having trouble entering information with the chat, you should be able to now. Another question from the Q&A is, do you have any exchange with the Nurses' Health Study out of Harvard School of Public Health?
I don't think we've had exchange with them. We've certainly at times highlighted some of the findings. We've been in the last, I would say, 6-7 years, not as well equipped to take on many issues as Our Bodies Ourselves. We morphed into a largely volunteer-driven organization, and it's one of the reasons we're so happy to collaborate with Suffolk, which runs the website now, and all these content experts are coordinated by Suffolk. we have been largely volunteer, the board members and close colleagues doing a lot of the work. And without the staff we used to have, we can't engage as robustly with those kinds of researchers in the way we did in the past. That will hopefully happen more and more as things become, ramp up a bit. We're hoping to get more funding for some of the advocacy work and support for translation adaptation projects. There are some great groups out there, though, who are doing some of this work in a way that we are so proud. Collective Action for Reproductive Power, I might have gotten that wrong. My mind is a little fuzzy today. They just received a large grant from the Mackenzie Scott funds. There's a group called Women Living Better. Well, womenlivingbetter.org is the website. It's not a group named that, but many of our collaborators are working with Nina Kozlov and others to produce unbelievably wonderful content about the perimenopause, doing surveys, a little bit of research, but doing the kind of work that we couldn't do without a staff. So it's largely being done with volunteer help, but it's excellent I think, information and content, which our Bodies or Cells today will be linking to. And there are other such groups creating really good content. And as Laura said, the content experts are curating it, shaping it in such a way that it can reach a wider audience.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a question from an attendee. Can you send the book to the court and Congress again? I think just maybe more broadly, do you have kind of ongoing work with engaging Congress and political representatives today?
We haven't had visits to congressional offices for the most part. We've maybe done a few. Mostly we've done this in collaboration with others. We are very concerned about the issue of genome editing, and particularly the germline. And we are working closely with this Center for Genetics and Society in seeking more of a public consensus, certainly a robust public debate and conversation, before we go down that very dangerous path of playing around with the human genome, and particularly with heritable genomic editing. And that's something that we've taken a position on. We have a new statement. It's at our website. And yes, some of that does involve reaching out to members of Congress, but it's not primarily what we're doing now. We're trying to find leaders in the field, particularly scientists who have ethical concerns of the sort we do. We did participate recently at a meeting at the Harvard Kennedy School about synthetic embryos, and those are the kinds of things we might do. But we're hoping that a wider public discourse where scientists can describe what they are doing in a way that the public can understand will lead to a conversation that at least puts everything on the table the way we all mutually agree. That's one of the things that concerns us, is scientists running off, doing things that then can be misrepresented to the public, sometimes in a way that produces a very anti-science sentiment. And we have a real problem in this country now with a strong anti-science streak, a sentiment that it poses personal and political problems for people engaged in this. So we really don't want the horse out of the barn too far before we rein things in and have a conversation that includes everyone. And many of the concepts can be understood by the lay public. Not everything, but many.
We have a comment in the chat that was wonderful and to share. It's from a viewer who said that they were a babysitter in the early 70s for a family that owned the book, and that they couldn't wait to get the kids to bed so they could read it in private. Which I think is just a wonderful anecdote. Thank you for sharing. We have another question in the chat asking if there's research connecting women's bodies to the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in women.
I know there is research going on. I'm not following it closely. Maybe Laura is. I do know some people who are, but it's not something that I can pull out of my head.
It's not something I can pull out of my head quite either, but I do want to note that one of the areas on the website, so one of the areas that, we collect information on is growing older, as we call it, the subject area. And that would be where to look for ongoing additions to information about the connection to Alzheimer's. That's also, connected to a long time theme for Our Bodies, Ourselves, right? The growing older volume that I think was in your slide deck, Judy. So we're continuing.
Yeah. And I do think there's some really important research that is looking at the connections between the environment and likelihood of developing Alzheimer's, not just genetic connections, but really environmental exposures. And I'm not familiar with that, but I know it's going on. And some people are suggesting we will be getting some meaningful information out of that soon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, just a follow up in the chat on the attendee who was a babysitter who couldn't wait to read the book. They say that today they are a certified professional midwife and operate a freestanding birth center. So, that
Erin,
inspired them.
because of the time, we didn't get to all the issues that we talk about. We just mentioned a few. One of the major things we're working on now is increasing access to midwifery care, and in particular, freestanding birth centers. And I hope that everyone in your audience will turn to their state legislators. The Senate is completely on board. They voted the CPM licensure bill over, multiple years. But we need a lot more pressure brought upon members of the House. We think we have tremendous support there. In my personal opinion, we need pressure on the Speaker of the House because there is an important piece of legislation that would license and regulate certified professional midwives, which would then make them available as caregivers for freestanding birth centers. Now, we have a ways to go to get back to even where we were. We had a few such birth centers in the state. North Shore closed down last year. We were very concerned about what might happen at Cambridge Birth Center in Cambridge, but that is going to be reopening. We're very happy about that. The Neighborhood Birth Center in Nubian Square in Roxbury will be opening next year, and that is a true freestanding birth center controlled by the community. The backup hospital has already agreed. It's going to be Boston Medical Center. There's a midwife in Worcester who's going to be hopefully opening a birth center there soon. The one functioning birth center is the Seven Sister Midwifery Birth Center in Northampton and Florence, Massachusetts, in Western Mass. And that's, I think, appalling that in a state like Massachusetts, we now have one functioning freestanding birth center. One of the ways we can change that is getting this legislation passed and insisting that we have better access to midwifery care, both in hospital, in birth centers, and even home birth access. That's one of the things we've worked on for decades, and we have so many colleagues, particularly in Massachusetts, who've worked on this issue for decades. There'll be a book written about this someday. Why did it take so long?
Well, thank
We're
you.
still not there yet.
With the time, maybe just one more question. And we have a question in the chat that says that they remember an important statement from Our Bodies, Ourselves was that medical journals were just doctors' magazines we could read and understand. They ask, is that still the case given that many of those medical journals have gone online and are less accessible for people that don't have, say, a subscription or access through a university?
Well, the truth is that much of what is written in these journals is accessible. Many of them actually do allow free access. They're not all controlled with high prices. And you can find that out easily by trying to go. And they sometimes let you access articles up to a certain number. Then you have MedPage. You have a lot of free online services that digest and summarize the results of these articles, and you can check those out. You have WebMD. You have all kinds of resources that summarize the latest findings, and you can go to your local public library, like Wilmington Public Library, and if you want to read the whole thing, the public library will get it for you. So it's not actually that hard. In fact, in many ways, it's easier now to access medical journal content than it used to be.
Although reading and understanding the content as medicine has become much more specialized might be another thing, right? So I think in terms of access to the text itself, that has improved a lot, but access to the information, it can be overwhelming to have so much. And also, if you don't have an advanced education or a medical education, a lot of what's published can be hard to sort through and to interpret. Yeah, much less critique. So that's
why your work at Our Bodies, Ourselves today with the content experts is so important, Laura, because that is the way you curate and capture information makes it accessible, makes it digestible in a way that even a 10th grade reading level, sometimes even lower, person could manage.
Mm-hmm. I guess I lied. I have one more question to touch on with that. You know, with the prevalence of misinformation online, do you have any recommendation beyond, of course, going to Our Bodies, Ourselves today, for people to kind of vet or evaluate the health information that they're coming across? What are some maybe red or green flags they should look for when they are encountering health information online?
Well, the first big one is who funds it. There are many websites that look like they're even consumer created, consumer driven, but they're funded by a drug company with a very different agenda. Some of the information might be good, but you always have to question the validity of content when the funding comes from a for-profit company that has a vested interest. That's just the nature of the beast. We're fighting this expansion of hangars for private jets at Hanscom Field right now, and obviously the private investors, they want to do it. The part of the billionaire class, they want to do this, but what about Massport? Massport is representing the public. And so we can argue something like Massport has a responsibility to keep the public's interests at heart. And I will call out one of my classmates and a senator from that area, Senator Mike Barrett, for doing amazing work in the public interest in this regard. He's not expecting for-profit companies to do anything other than what they do, but he is expecting some entity in the public sector to think about the public's interest. And we have always had this policy of no funding from pharmaceutical companies or sources that could compromise what we do, because we want people to be able to trust our messages. And it doesn't mean we haven't collaborated with people in industry. We haven't been on committees that the government brought together, that we haven't in fact written things with people in industry, but we don't take any funding from those sources. So that is very important distinction. What Laura said about conflicts of interest often goes unheeded, and people don't even think about it, but it is very important. Ultimately, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And we learned that a long time ago.
If I could add, along with who funds it, it's really worthwhile to see whether what you're reading also cites its sources. So where are they getting their information from? And that goes not just for health information, right? For all the information we get, information literacy is really important. And thank you to all of you public librarians who are doing your part to help people along and increase our information literacy. funding? What are their sources? Who are they talking about? How diverse set of people are they interviewing or studying for their study? Do you see yourself reflected in the group? And I think I would like to see a lot more patient-focused medical information available to people as well, to really include people in their decision-making when it comes to their health and their bodies.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Judy and Laura, for joining us tonight. Everyone in the chat, we will be sending out the recording and links, and also we'll have the slides accessible for you. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you again so much for joining us.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.